As the role of the energy grid expands to accommodate the growth in DERs, connected devices, and the like, how does the industry need to change? For example, how does the energy grid need to evolve to accommodate this growth in DERs and new connected devices? How do we ensure equitable pricing for all customers? How should we look at things differently today? And who, in your opinion, is already taking a different approach? Roger, I know Oracle Utilities is deeply involved with the grid as a flexible platform. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so let me start out by saying I think the vernacular probably needs to change a little bit around the idea that this grid discussion is somehow disconnected a little bit from customers, and I think we're all starting to talk about it. But we actually draw that value chain as a circle now, because clearly customers should be at the forefront in terms of all these discussions. What's best for the customer? And again, I go back and relate it to what we all witnessed in telecom that we're all familiar with, which was the old black telephone that sat on our kitchen walls for years and years and years and migrated into the touch-tone phone. Remember you got your first touch-tone phone and how that changed the industry, because you could then handle call centers differently and you could plug in codes to get different information. That's the kind of thing that we're starting to see with the smart meter in the power business. But I would also tell you that I think the smart meter today, in terms of where technology is going to be in the future, and trying to predict that is a huge opportunity. It might be as tough as predicting interest rates, but the idea that technology is going to move slowly is probably gone. And the fact that we're going to see a huge change beyond the meter today, I think, is absolutely going to happen. And the paradigm shift that we're going to see then is customers being in a position to really dictate what they're demanding from their utilities, to really have a conversation around what the expectations from the utilities are. And so what we're going to see as we shift that paradigm and become more focused on the customer, I really think, is that there's going to be a fundamental change in how customers think of beyond the meter. Not on the other side of the meter, but beyond the meter. What do customers want from those utilities? I think customers will dictate and drive what we do in this industry, just like they did in telecom and just like they are in retail, my two earlier examples. Customers will drive the changes that we're about to see. And I think it's very difficult to predict how that's going to change, but I can almost guarantee you that it's going to change. I think then what you're going to have is this shift of discussion. Customers used to talk about what it costs to get certain things. They're not going to talk about what it costs in the future. Just like we don't talk about our phone call and what it costs anymore. Now we talk about all the services we can get on our phone. We talk about all the data. Data is more important now on phones than actual cost for phone calls, right? That shift is going to come in this industry, and I can't stress it enough. We got to get ahead of all that. If we can predict what some of that's going to look like, that would be great. But my guess is technology is going to move that paradigm so quickly that this industry needs to have alignment between what the utilities think we ought to do and what the regulators think we ought to do, and then partner with innovative technology companies to make sure that we're getting the best of all worlds. So I think the real question for us is what's the equivalent to the utility iPhone?
Thanks so much, Roger. Frank, your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm going to plow a little ground that we've already plowed here, but let me first of all say that I think this analogy to say you've gone from the rotary phone to the touch-tone phone is probably pretty accurate. And I don't think there's any way that we can really know the direction that the industry will go, except for a couple of things. And one of the things I already said is that the integration that we have through the grid really does support all this stuff. And the grid is not going away. You know, we've had in solar debates we've had in some of our states, we've had people say, well, you know, I could just put a battery and a solar panel on my roof and leave the grid if you guys would just let me. I'm like, we can't keep you on the grid. Get off if you want. But see, they can't do that because they can't maintain the reliability and they can't maintain the cost. So let me start by saying I think as we approach these issues, it's important to do this thoughtfully and with a little bit of humility. That's why I like what Ohio's doing, for example, taking it stepwise, thinking it through a little bit, because we got a pretty darn good thing going here. I really am proud to work for a utility because we give people a civilization-defining product, and we do it for pennies a day, and it's there all the time. So as we start thinking about, well, maybe we should make some sort of DSO, or maybe we should go ahead and create transactive energy markets, going at this with a thought of the customer in mind, not only for what the customer might want to have, but what the customer we know needs, and that's low price, reliable power, is really important. I'd say second, and I said this before, we need to start where states are today. And states begin from very different places on this. If a state wants to experiment, it should. But we need to make sure that as we move into the next phase of what energy regulation looks like, we need to make sure that we're not pushing too fast, or we'll violate that first principle that I just indicated. Third thing, and we've talked about this a little bit, but this is really important. Almost every utility represented in this room has some sort of grid modernization filing going in almost every one of their jurisdictions. They're going to cost money. And so we're going to have to make some decisions about where our money is going to go and what kind of things we want out of a modern grid. If we want to create these transactive energy markets, or if we want to create a lot of interaction at the distribution level, that's great. But we have to understand that means we're investing a lot of money in the grid. There's a lot of value we can get from doing things to help enable these kinds of more sophisticated and smarter grids, but that probably goes more to the reliability side at first before it goes to the market side. At some point, we have to have a discussion about how much money are we willing to put in now and how we're going to pace that level of investment. Because we're not going to make high levels of investment and start causing our customers to have substantial rate increases. It's just not going to happen. These folks won't let it happen. I will say also that as you think about adding all that intelligence to the grid, one point that was made a moment ago, and it's really important to remember, is that every time you add another place to get into the grid, you add another portal for a bad guy to get into. And that really goes to the issue of grid security. So as we think about this, I remember a couple years ago I was at a grid security meeting with the financial sector. And they were talking with someone from the Obama White House at the time. And it was, I think, the Obama cybersecurity policy advisor. And he was saying, as you think about cybersecurity generally, not just in our industry, but if you think about cybersecurity generally, you got to think about this. Every time you add another device, every time you add another backdoor into your system in order to make it more convenient, you have to evaluate how much risk you're taking on and ask yourself, is it really worth it? Well, in this case, I certainly believe, and we certainly believe strongly, that it is worth it to make these kind of investments in the grid in the right place, at the right time, at the right price. But at the same time, we have to always keep this cybersecurity issue in mind. Finally, I'm going to get into the issue that's probably core to this question, which we're only getting to now after 10 minutes into this, and that is the issue of rate design is absolutely critical. Lisa cautioned me, don't be a nerd here, so I'm going to try not to. But it's really very simple. We price our product based on the volume that we sell today. In fact, our customers enjoy value from different pieces of our system. They enjoy value from the energy that's provided to them, but they also enjoy value from the assets that deliver that energy to them. And so it's going to become important that we make sure that we're pricing the product that we provide in some way that relates to the value that the customers receive. I recognize for those of you who work in consumer energy offices that there's a lot of issues with this. But in the end, it's going to be very important that we have a new paradigm on the way we price the product, or we won't be able to be effective in terms of assigning that value and that price appropriately and making sure that we're making the right kind of innovative investments into the system.
I think these last few points were sort of right on. In a state like Illinois where, I don't have a mandate, frankly, to create a market for anything. I have a mandate to keep the lights on at the lowest cost possible. And, I think we need to be ready. But, I think there's a really, heavy burden on advocates of grid mod once you sort of get past the reliability benefits of it and the O&M benefits of it. I think, we've yet to see whether that case can be made. In a state like Illinois, I think it's tough to say, look, we want to create a market for something and not pay attention to the cost of it. So for me, I think that is a really critical issue.
I'd like to dovetail a little on what Roger had to say. Having spent 30 years in the technology industry before becoming a commissioner, I have a little bit of a different perspective than the average regulator on technology adoption and the pace of adoption and the value that technology brings, because I spent 30 years essentially using technology to solve business problems. And one of the things that I think is sorely lacking right now in the current regulatory environment is a way to actually encourage our utilities to go and adopt some of these technologies. Because when you think about traditional rate making, traditional rate base, one of the things that Brian and I were talking about in the ready room before we were getting together was the docket that they have open in Illinois about dealing with software in the cloud versus having to go out and invest CapEx dollars and purchase software for on-premises use like APS recently did for their customer information system. And what we're doing is we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're living with essentially 50-year-old regulatory regime that makes it much more difficult for us to do some of the things that we really should be doing in terms of technology adoption. And, it goes back to, should we really be looking at how we should be changing the rules? I mean, and I'm probably going to get hammered on this if I don't know if you even want to say it, but I don't think Bond Bright anticipated any of the stuff we're dealing with today. And it's one of those things that maybe we need to go back and look at what kinds of changes that we need to make in the regulatory world to be able to accommodate some of the real world technology issues that we're having to deal with. And that may be a very provocative thing to say, but I think, at the end of the day, and I hate using that term, but I did it anyway, I think what we really need to look at is what kinds of changes do we need to make as regulators to accommodate the rapid pace of technology adoption, understanding that the customers are going to drive it.
A couple of our utilities have filed some semblance of a grid modernization plan, and what the game plan is to hold those plans in abeyance. Have our power forward proceeding, because what is clear to me, and this discussion has been great because it's helped me crystallize this a little bit, is we're going to have to make two really important decisions, I think, before we allow for true recovery in this space. I think the first decision surrounds this concept of what should be competitive in the grid mod space and what should be able to be recovered by an EDU through a rider or other mechanism. I think that is clear, and that will hopefully be articulated in the vision that the PUCO puts together post Power Forward. That's the first thing. And the second thing, when I really think about this, is typically we as commissioners, this has historically been a relatively easy game. Now, if you live in a competitive state and you've got these generation affiliate issues that Ohio has had, it's a much harder game. But generally speaking, a distribution rate case or request for recovery on providing reliable service, what are you really doing? You're making sure that there wasn't gold plating. You're making sure that expenses were prudently incurred. Okay. However, in this space, and this is why we are doing this, and this is why our focus is so customer driven, because part of what you're going to have to do in this space, I think, is conceptually say what, not necessarily what is cost effective, but what is cost worthy based upon what your customer base wants. And that's really hard too, based upon what Commissioner Little just said. I mean, look, we have generations of customers in the state of Ohio. I joke that if I start talking to my dad about changing how he receives his bill at 82 years of age and putting solar panels on his house, he's going to get a shotgun and chase me around the house, okay? And that's the reality. However, there are generations of customers that are coming up right now who can't fathom that this is how their power is delivered, and they are effectively, without much input and without much control, forced to pay a bill that is totally an enigma when they open it up every single month. And so this is not going to be easy. And I think it's going to mandate, like I said, some vision, and it's going to mandate, like I said, us acting as sort of subjective arbiters to figure out what may be cost worthy for approval at the end of the day. Now, the good thing is as you've said, we've got time. Okay, so you can set up the potential rubric for this, and you can potentially take it step by step to determine what's cost worthy in 2017, what's cost worthy in 2021, and then what's cost worthy in 2029. So we don't have to fully make the decisions right now, but again, I think you need to lay the groundwork, and I think we've all been saying the same thing in a sense. You need to lay the groundwork for the advancement of this new world. Again, it's about charting the path. It's not necessarily defining. It's not necessarily defining the iPhone. It's charting the path to get there.
Gentlemen, this has been an outstanding discussion, and I'm grateful to you all. And please join me in giving them a hand.